about 5 past. So, yeah, what do you say? Let's kick it off. Welcome, everyone, to another Midweek with Max. My voice isn't as terrible as it was last week. Apologies again for that. So, without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Max for the intros, and then we can move on from there.
All right, awesome. Thanks, everyone, for coming out to another Midweek with Max. On the tech engineering side, we are closing up some final reworks and refactoring of BFG and the PoPminer, so that'll make it easier to run individual parts of the stack. So same thing we've been talking about for a couple of weeks, that is landing imminently, probably in the next couple of days, getting that merged in and released. We're also putting the final touches on a white paper for our Hemi-specific approach to BitVM. And so hopefully look for at least a draft of that in the next couple days, probably before the end of the week here. And looking forward to getting feedback and having discussions in the broader BitVM design space about some of the interesting stuff we're doing. Aside from that, working on some infrastructure improvements. We're replacing ProxyD in our infrastructure with a custom version of RPC routing. So nothing too interesting there to dive into the details, but once we get that written and deployed, that should improve transaction propagation performance and RPC reliability. So one of those, some of the general improvements. And without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to Rick and we'll start going through questions. Hopefully very soon. We're still working on finalizing a few things. This is a non-committal date, but I would expect that stuff to be published before the end of next week. Again, non-committal, but I think that's a reasonable date for an announcement there. So don't hold us to that. Things are still shifting. We're still figuring out final things that have to go in for getting tokenomics completely wrapped up. But I think that's a reasonable date for people to target.
Oh, wow. Okay. So wait, so are we
Again,
at...
non-committal date, that's my best estimate right now, given everything going on behind the scenes.
Would you say that qualifies us for hyper soon?
I'm not sure if we're quite at hyper soon yet.
Okay, that's fair. That's
maybe
totally
close.
All right.
But yeah, definitely expect, it's reasonable to probably expect something before the end of next week. Again, non-committal date, but I think that's a reasonable target.
That's incredible news. Okay. This question has a caveat attached to it, which I think is pretty funny. Max, please don't say very soon. when, when will mainnet incentive season 1 end?
Still working on the final date for that. So unfortunately, today's probably going to be a lot of still working on stuff, still trying to hammer down exact dates. I would expect it to last for at least another 2 weeks, potentially a bit longer. But that's working backwards from an actual TGE date, and that's still up in the air, but we're collapsing waves and getting to a decision there. So TBD for now. I would expect it to run for at least an additional 2 weeks. It may be a little bit longer than that.
All right. Let's see. We are entering the points realm. When will testnet points be visible again? Many of us would like to check how many points we have collected during the testnet season, but currently we're unable to.
Two things. Testnet points minus POP are available on the staking dashboard, but it's not 100%. So working on getting a standalone area to view breakdown of points. As of now, the thought process would be to have visibility, as soon as possible for testnet points. We're looking to finish some outliers on POP and get that looped up, which is with Max this morning and yesterday about this. So something that we are actively working on. Between that and one other kind of outlier I found this morning, looking to get those fixed, and then we can push something, at least like a checker like we had before for testnet points. Then that would collapse as well for when this mainnet season's over. We're still making some decisions on that, but there will be a checker as well for total on that as well. So I don't know if it'll be the same location or a different one. But so original answer, very soon on testnet points, getting that kind of, just want to make sure that it's accurate before we showcase anything. But I expect that will be done soon.
That is further great news. Still on the topic of points, what is the value of testnet points versus mainnet points?
I can't give an exact value, but there's different tranches. So basically, the way that I would look at it or simplify it is that there's a percentage of 100% that's given for each, right? So it's not quite 50-50, but that would further be broken down by the total amount of points in that season. So the math on that would be, there's some group or some percentage of 100 that is going towards testnet versus mainnet, and then beyond that, it would be, the point weight would require you to also look at all points earned for that season versus yours. So a little bit of math there, but as far as weighting, I can't give an exact number on that. But I can say that, being early and involving yourself in testnet and everything usually means good things. So
I'll also add to that, there's no fixed ratio of the incentive pool for testnet versus mainnet season one. Like eventually when all the waves collapse, obviously there will be numbers and you could construct a ratio, but we were approaching the incentive pools for both of those are independent. So for testnet, it's, how much time were people spending doing tests on average for, doing this versus that, and how many relative points you got. Whereas for mainnet, we're looking at the, economic benefit to the protocol of the activities users did. So that's to say if people, if we had half the TVL contributed by people in the points program versus what we have now, that would affect the total points pool for mainnet. So it's not just a fixed testnet to mainnet ratio. It is looking at the realities of what people were doing on testnet and separately, independently looking at the economic benefit of the activity so far in mainnet and rewarding those proportionally.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We got one more for points, and then we're moving on to the other category. Do you earn points for liquidity in a V-through pool? In a V-through, that's not a word. Let me start that over. I'll do it in English this time. Do you earn points for liquidity in a V3 pool that is not currently within range when the peer is listed in absinthe?
yes, because what we're looking at is capital deployed per day. So basically the base for all of this is a point per dollar per day on the capital side. I will say that there's safeguards in place for that, though, that don't allow for outrageous things. So if you're looking to basically set null liquidity, then it won't work. But as far as hey, my pool went out of range, or just basic market movement, that's totally fine and understandable. The way that it kind of functions is by checking that on the average over the course of a day. So it's awarding points based upon to break it down all the way. In theory, if the liquidity was there for 51% of the day, so on and so forth, then it would award for that day. Also, when it comes to range, it's looking at a similar mechanic. I don't know the exact cutoffs for what's considered active or not when it's out of range, but I do know that in all situations, there's been quite a few, to be fair. Probably like 20 times that I've looked at points awarded for out of range liquidity. It's just, based on market movement. This includes myself actually on a USDC ETH pool last week. With rapid ETH movement, went out of range. It still awards for that. So, you're pretty much, covered in the sense that your things go out of range based on market movements, but try to game the system, it's not going to work. One other thing I'll add, since that was the last points question, at least for now, looking at a lot of improvements for future iterations. I've talked on this before, but spent a lot of time with Absinthe in the past week. I feel like I said that a lot, but much more than usual. Had a couple phone calls as well as some async communications, and really looking to tighten things up on the user-facing side and also, kind of back end for rollout purposes. So, future iterations will not have, some of these issues that we've been seeing. A lot of them are isolated at the same time, trying to get that down to as close to zero as possible. So working on some additional infrastructure that will make this super easy, as well as, future iterations will have like a rollout schedule that's much more like fluid, in the sense that, okay, this protocol is onboarded, or we're looking to do this liquidity pool. It will be in a set range on a set platform, very straightforward, which makes it easier not only for the user, but also for tracking purposes. Mainnet was a little bit more hectic. I also work on the BD side. BD Eco is kind of my role. So, things were coming in so fast. It was definitely very interesting to plug and play everything. So that's where some of, I think, our issues have come out of. But beyond that, making sure that everything's optical, the adrenaline rush of points, going to make sure that that's much more attuned, so that as you're actively deploying capital or, performing tasks, points are as immediate as possible. So there's some improvements that will be made that basically make that near instant for almost all things. Granted, this is speculative because I don't know what all things are yet, but based on the things that we have now, and also looking at additional kind of fine tweaks to UI UX in order to make sure that you guys are kind of getting the best experience. And lastly, there's actually a tool that's being worked on. This won't be around most likely till post TGE, but for future iterations, there'll be a tooling that can allow you to directly report a points issue from the dashboard, and that will attach some data to it as well, so that when I receive it, it's much more informed. A lot of users include all the data needed. In most cases, still require some research and everything, which is time consuming, and that's why sometimes things seem like they're moving slow. But that will greatly, increase that response time, as well as the latency on that will go down significantly. So all these little improvements are adding up, and I think will be a much more fluid and straightforward experience. But one other comment I'll say is that we're working on, as mentioned previously, not only having a manual points process where we're checking all of these with scripts and then comparing to Absinthe data, but also there's other cumulatives that we'll look at as well to ensure that the data is accurate. So, I've answered a couple of tickets this morning as well, but in general, if you're seeing that's inaccurate, please, over the next week or so, you'll see additional rollouts. This morning there was a refresh, but if you're seeing something that's wildly inaccurate, please let me know. And I think it will continue to get better as we close off the season, and then there will be a period where we can continue to fix things. But looking to improve a lot of this so that there is nowhere near as much friction in the future, for regardless of the amount of users. So much appreciated, Rick.
Very much appreciated, Dr. Greenwood. That was awesome. I couldn't imagine any more points questions coming after that. Okay, moving on to others. When will the next Hemi funding round / announcement be?
No info on that, but stay tuned. There's a lot of exciting news just in general coming in, the next couple of weeks, but no specific information on that to share at the moment.
All right, rock and roll. When will Hemi hatchlings move to mainnet?
Very soon. Well, we've had some other things take priority with the smart contract and deployment team, but probably before the end of the week.
All right, this is like the good news episode of Midweek with Max. This is great.
Sort of.
Well, I mean, or speculatively good news,
better
but
than
still,
last week. We'll put it
it's
that way.
much better than last week. Yeah, absolutely. And last week wasn't bad. I mean, I was dying, and yeah, I mean, but no, things sound a lot more, a lot more good. That's not even a phrase. I'm still sick. Sorry. Any updates for Node license holders?
No updates there either. Like I said last week or the week before, the market for node sales, it's really not there. So we're probably not going to reopen it unless things change on that side. If you did buy a node license already, though, you either will get your node license as you purchased it or something equivalent.
All right, Max. I hope you're sitting down because there's a litany of engineering questions. All right.
All right, this is the fun part.
All right, here we go, buddy. Um, when will the new POP payout algorithm be implemented?
Before the end of the month. And we will give people at least 72 hours notice so they can review it, understand it, decide if they want to pop mine, make tweaks to the PoPminer. So before the end of the month, and people will have at least 3-day notice.
That's great news. Actually, before we move on to engineering, just because I've seen this asked several times in Discord, John, do we have any window as to when Epoch 2 of Deimos will be closing?
Uh, and I feel like this is a repetitive answer. The thought process is to give people as much possible, much time as possible, while at the same time having it closed before season end. So that depends on, season end as well. So as that kind of moves around, which is completely out of my hands, we just kind of move that date out. So realistically, as of right now, I know that you're good this week, and I would say the earliest that it would close would be next week. So that's what I can say for now. Looking to pretty much do that, right before we close out the season.
Totally fair. And as we've said, we'll give around 48 hours notice before it closes to give folks, I guess, 48 hours more time to do it, even though it's been open for like 20 days. Just do it now. What the hell? I mean, if you want to, I'm just going to move on to more engineering questions. I'm still loopy. I'm sorry, guys. All right, here we go. When a smart contract inside the HVM reads the Bitcoin state, e.g., UTXO, originals, etc., and then the Bitcoin chain reorgs by 1 or 2 blocks, what mechanism do Hemi nodes use to roll back or reconcile the EVM state that has already been committed?
That's a really good question. So just a little bit of background info. So the way that, if you look at just a pure Ethereum L2, like say Optimism, the way that it works is if there's an Ethereum reorg, that also causes a reorg of the L2. And for Hemi, with our Bitcoin L2 connectivity, we treat it a little differently. So the way that HVM updates Bitcoin state, it does not reorg the Hemi chain if there's a Bitcoin reorg. Obviously, that's reorging due to a Hemi reorg that gets published to a Bitcoin reorg. That's a separate issue. But looking at HVM state, smart contract awareness of Bitcoin data, that can reorg under the contract. So if Bitcoin experiences a reorg, then HVM state will reorg while the Hemi chain continues moving forward. So that's something that DApp developers have to take into account. So if you're building, say, a non-custodial Bitcoin asset DEX or something, you would need to choose a certain number of Bitcoin confirmations that you are going to wait for to see a transaction on Bitcoin that causes a trade on Hemi to finalize. So you'd have to choose a confirmation value of Bitcoin that you feel comfortable with, that Bitcoin's not going to reorg beyond that distance, and then use that in your DApp. And the reason we did that is we don't want there to be a Bitcoin reorg that causes a reorg of all of this Hemi stake that's unrelated to the actual Bitcoin data itself. Instead, it makes sense to let the DApp developers deal with that in the way that makes sense for their application, the risk their users are taking for various Bitcoin-aware use cases. I will also say in there the full node view of Bitcoin that HVM maintains runs 2 blocks behind the actual known Bitcoin consensus tip. The reason for that's twofold. One, it is it ensures there's always a 2-block barrier. So whenever an HVM app does something in response to a Bitcoin event, at a minimum, it does 2 actual Bitcoin confirmations on the main Bitcoin chain. But the other more important reason, it's a edge case / attack vector if we were to run it at tip, because a Bitcoin miner could create a block, withhold it, publish that block to HVM, and get HVM state to need that block that they're withholding. And HVM would only need the actual full block data if it's a block that it indexes in its full node view. So running it 2 blocks behind the tip means that that attack's basically impossible unless you own the majority of Bitcoin hash rate, in which case tons of other stuff breaks, and that's not the biggest concern anyway. So high level, it's up to the DApp developers to choose what level of Bitcoin confirmations for certain activities they're comfortable with. But at a minimum, the protocol is going to force you to wait 2 confirmations because of that full node view delay against the actual canonical node tip.
All right, thank you, sir. I have 3 follow-ups to that question. Question the first. Does the HVM persist a per-transaction snapshot of the referenced Bitcoin header inside the EVM state root, or only at block granularity?
Not quite sure what that question is trying to ask. Does HVM persist a per-transaction snapshot? Reference Bitcoin header. So I'll just explain the HVM state overall, and hopefully this answers the question. So Hemi, the HVM system maintains 2 different Bitcoin nodes. One of them is a lightweight consensus-only node, so basically header level consensus tracking what is actually the canonical chain. And then you have the full node, which is updated deterministically based on that lightweight view. That's with that 2-block lag. So the full node indexes data in certain ways based on the queries you want to support. So right now with HVM phase 0, for example, you can query for the UTXOs of a certain script hash or address, because you can convert an address to a Bitcoin script and then get the script hash. You could look up the balance of a script hash, so the sum of all the UTXO values maintained. You could look at the current chain geometry, what is the current canonical tip. You could look at a transaction, and that's indexed by the containing blocks. You're able to get transaction data and the block that it's contained in. And all of that is indexed in a way that's efficient to query. So there's nothing being stored in any direct smart contract state. Rather, what's happening is when you call an HVM precompile, it's stepping outside of the standard EVM execution and then talking directly to that deterministic Bitcoin full node to complete the query and bring that information back into the EVM, back to where the smart contract was executing, and then it can continue with that data. So for example, if you were to call the HVM precompile for getting the balance of an address, that's going to step outside of standard EVM computation. It's going to talk to the Bitcoin full node. It's going to get that balance. It's going to bring that balance back into the EVM, and then EVM execution continues with that value returned into the execution. So there will be, with HVM phase 1, there will be some minimal information that's maintained in a smart contract about chain geometry and basically a state root of that full node system. And there's some applications for that for ZK provability and being able to do compact proofs of HVM state in interesting ways. But it's the full node's really what matters, and the queries against the precompiles basically map to queries against an indexed data structure that is indexed in a way that supports efficiently completing that query.
All right. Thank you very much. I got 2 more follow-ups to that original question. How? Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second on this one. How is gas griefing prevented if a malicious contract queries deep UTXO history that must be re-executed after a reorg?
So that's something that the DApp themselves manages, and also I just talked about the efficiency of the index data, the way that data is structured to efficiently respond to the queries that we support with HVM. So if there were to be a reorg of Bitcoin that changed UTXO data, well, first off, there's no such thing as like a really old UTXO query, at least not in the current form of HVM. Whatever view of the UTXO table you're getting, that is the UTXO table at the point in time where HVM state currently is. So if the consensus tip is at Bitcoin block 100, and the HVM full node state is at block 98, and any UTXO query will be against the view of the UTXO table at that block 98. So there's no way to tell HVM, unwind back to the UTXO view of Bitcoin block 80 and then do a query against it. So there's no way for smart contract calls looking at the UTXO table or any other Bitcoin data to cause a bunch of unwinding and data manipulation to figure out how to respond to a query at an older point in time. In the future, that may be something that we support with some sort of efficient data structure that's able to unwind up to a certain height. And then we could bound that and provide queries against that. It costs more gas, but at the moment, HVM is only returning its current view of things like the UTXO table or looking at, blocking the Bitcoin chain or whatever. So none of that, there's no griefing attacks against any of that because it's just the maximum computation you can require is whatever that query against that efficient index data structure takes. And then if there is a reorg on the Bitcoin side, the DApp just has to handle that with either waiting for a certain number of confirmations before a transaction is deemed confirmed and actions are completed or finalized on the DApp side. Take, for example, the Bitcoin tunnel. Even though the Bitcoin tunnel can see your deposit transaction after 2 Bitcoin blocks, it waits until currently set to 4 Bitcoin blocks of confirmation before actually accepting it, so that you couldn't have a short Bitcoin reorg basically undo that deposit. So you need similar mechanisms for any DApp to build with HVM. We're not trying to create a always forward view of Bitcoin because that's not useful and introduces a lot of complexities for other DApps that aren't using HVM functionality. But short answer, there's no gas griefing attack. If there's a Bitcoin reorg, then your DApp just has to handle that reorg, and higher level than that, it should be waiting for sufficient Bitcoin confirmations for any action on Bitcoin that triggers something that can't be reversed on the DApp side.
Okay, there's my mute button. Sorry about that. All right, and the third follow-up to this before we start another chain of questions and follow-ups. Will the HVM Bitcoin state logic change once BitVM-V2 or future mempool inclusion proofs become part of the Bitcoin tunnel roadmap?
Will the HVM Bitcoin? Yes. So HVM Phase 1, which is basically all the features needed to support BitVM and ZK provability of the Hemi network, that will introduce some under the hood changes to the way that data is indexed and the queries that can be run against it. And it will also introduce some new EVM level precompiles that you could call and use in your DApp that, with these new data structures, we're able to support efficiently. So high level, yes, the Bitcoin state logic will change. Existing logic will not change, but there will be the addition of new logic, and under the hood, things will be managed from like a data structure perspective a little bit differently. And then mempool inclusion proofs, we're not going to be doing anything with the mempool. The problem is the mempool is subjective, so not all nodes on the Bitcoin network have the same view of the mempool. And so you could theoretically today write a Bitcoin or an HVM-enabled application that a user could send a Bitcoin transaction to and claim that it's in the mempool. And if that DApp could validate that transaction does fit on the current view of Bitcoin state, is in it's spending a valid unspent UTXO and spending it correctly. But that would not be a mempool inclusion proof because there's no proof that it actually propagated to nodes on the Bitcoin network. So since that's not something you can deterministically prove, there won't be any mempool visibility at all in HVM at any point in time. The closest would be being able to check if a transaction could theoretically be entered into the mempool based on the current full node view. But again, that full node view is running 2 Bitcoin blocks behind. So even doing that validation wouldn't ensure that transaction, rather than an alternate one, would get into the chain.
All right. Speaking of chains, Suppose an H chain wants a pop anchor every block, while another is okay with one every 6 blocks. How does Hemi prevent a low security H chain from imposing higher fees or orphan risks on the shared pop publisher / miner set?
So the setup be logically independent. So obviously it could be the same person, deciding to pop mine for 30 different H chains, but they're not uh, forced to do that. They choose which H chains they want to pop mine for, and then they might be pop mining just for this one, gaming chain that they really like. They might be pop mining for every H chain in the world. So that's an individual decision for each pop miner, basically. Which H chains do I want to pop mine? What incentives are they paying me to do that? Is it enough to afford the fees to publish their data to Hemi? Considering the other pop miners that are active on that specific chain. So there's no instance where a, a certain H chain's incentives would affect another H chain's incentives, except by uh, essentially, bidding up the cost of doing data publications to Hemi if an H chain were to be paying, ridiculous amounts to pop miners. But again, it is a self-equalizing thing. So if one H chain publishes, pays to get 10,000 proofs published in an hour, well, other chains still for pop security only need a small handful of publications. So that H chain is going to have to pay an extreme amount in order to, flood the mempool basically, and try to stop other chains from getting just a small handful of transactions in.
All right. How is revenue from those differentiated service tunnels routed on chain back to pop miners and $Hemi stakers?
Hey, sorry, I think I lost you for a second. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Do you want me to repeat?
I think about it. So revenue from, I'm not sure if they mean different service levels. So basically H chains, maybe they mean like different L3, L4, L5, it could be different parts in the stack. So basically L3s are the only chains that would generally pop mine to Hemi. Other chains, you could theoretically have a hybrid architecture where an L4 settles to an L3, but then does pop publications to Hemi L2. So there are some hybrid designs you could do, but basically, high level, only L3s would be doing pop publications to Hemi, and then L4s could do pop publications to the respective L3s, which then cumulatively, you start building out this basically free of publications to different security aggregation layers. So L3s could be security aggregation layers for L4s, et cetera. So the L3s are the only ones generally who would be paying fees on the Hemi network directly. And then those would be, at least a portion of those fees would be taken and given to the people who are doing pop mining from Hemi to the Bitcoin L1. So basically, that creates an environment where the L3's security budgets are getting fed into, we're subsidizing the security budget of Hemi doing publications itself to Bitcoin that secure indirectly those L3s. And if you want to go up the stack, those L3s indirectly are securing those L4s. And those L3s, generally speaking, would be getting publication fees from those L4s, and they'd be routing those into the payouts from the L3 to the L2 pop publication. It's a little confusing, but basically, L3s pay fees natively on the Hemi network. Those in general would forward pop mining fees paid by L4s or a portion of those to that L3 to L2 payment. And then a portion of that L3 to L2 payment gets forwarded to the pop miners who are doing the L2 to L1 payment.
All right. And what did Josh just write? Hold on. Could governance throttle or sandbox an H chain whose chosen cadence endangers global pop economics?
There will be some mechanics. So there will be basically each chain that publishes let's just call them each L3 that publishes to Hemi will have a specific chain identifier. And so that's useful because it will basically construct a data structure where you can quickly see what pop publications for a specific chain are included without having to parse through the entire pop publication set. but that also could be used theoretically for governance to do throttling. The problem is Hemi is a permissionless network, so while there will be like the standard default way that we support pop publications in this, intelligent data structure that keeps track of these other L3's pop publications, people could, just like we implemented pop on Bitcoin without Bitcoin having pop specific features, people could theoretically implement pop on an L3 in the non-standard way where they are just publishing data as call data to the Hemi network and then using that for consensus. And in that case, those from a protocol level, those transactions would be indistinguishable from just regular user publications that have a bunch of call data in them. So high level, yes, in some way that could be done with governance, but it's at the end of the day, any permissionless network has to operate based on the assumptions of fee market and efficient resource allocation. And so there are always extreme cases where that could potentially be spammed, but it'd be extremely expensive to do that, and it would basically redirect a bunch of revenue to the top miners who are securing Hemi to Bitcoin.
All right. We are out of the chain builder questions. As Hemi connects real-time Bitcoin blocks to an EVM sequencer, how will the protocol handle cross-layer MEV, e.g., an ordinals, not originals, Josh, mint on BTC that immediately triggers an AMM trade on Hemi? Sorry, Josh.
Good question. So as I mentioned earlier with the HVM architecture, the full node view is running at a 2-block delay to the known consensus tip. So that does mean there's already, it depends on the type of application. That can either be good or bad for MEV. But essentially, there's no instance where an application where somebody could do something on Bitcoin to quickly trigger something on the HVM application side that would become an MEV issue. This solving MEV really depends on what you're building. And so you have to architect your Bitcoin aware HVM using DApp correctly and thinking through the MEV scenarios that affect your particular protocol. So for example, if you have a cross-chain DEX and you're buying an ordinal for somebody, you'd want to construct it where a user on Bitcoin who owns the ordinal comes and proves that they own this specific ordinal that they want to sell. So basically signing a message that we can say, okay, yeah, it is that address that owns the ordinal, and that address signed a message saying they want to sell the ordinal. So that's a bona fide offer. And they put it up for, 100 USDC. Okay, great. That goes into an order matching system. Basically, they would probably, in a proper design of that protocol, they would post some collateral on the Hemi side. So they'd post 10 USDC collateral if the ordinal is bought, but they don't deliver it within the delivery time of 4 hours or whatever. And then somebody else who wants to buy the ordinal, they would see the offer of selling that ordinal for 100 USDC. They would put up their 100 USDC, that'd go into escrow in the smart contract. The smart contract on Hemi would say, okay, this user is the rightful owner of the ordinal. The current owner on Bitcoin who's selling it has 4 hours to transfer it to the address specified by the buyer. And then it uses HVM to monitor to make sure that ordinal was correctly sent over to that recipient within the amount of time. If not, the buyer gets the seller's collateral for misbehavior, so that's a 10 USDC. Or if it is sent in time, then the transaction is cleared and finalized on Hemi, and the 100 USDC is released to the seller. So that sort of architecture, there wouldn't be any MEV opportunity unless you were talking about, MEV to get a transaction included on Hemi the quickest to be the one who buys the ordinal and front running somebody else who wants to pay the same price for that ordinal, or get a bid in earlier in an auction model or something. But that's just standard EVM order flow MEV mechanics, and nothing specific to HVM or Bitcoin.
All right, sir. And the last question I have on deck for today. Will you deploy a native cross-domain MEV auction/PBS so this value is captured on chain? And if so, how will the proceeds be shared amongst PoPminers, sequencers, and Hemi stakers?
Main MEV auction PBS. Probably once we decentralize the sequencer, there will be some sort of MEV service, and that's the kind of thing anyone could go and build their own MEV service. Like, Flashbots didn't need the approval from anyone at Ethereum to build Flashbots, right? There's stuff that Ethereum can do architecturally that supports MEV marketplaces or prevents certain types of MEV. On the Hemi side, we may take a look at some of those things. There are with intents and some of the other account abstraction features, there are potentially some interesting applications of that for all kinds of MEV marketplaces. In general, it's probably not something that we would not be maintaining an MEV marketplace. More than likely, that would be something that a third party or multiple third party services would do. And Hemi sequencers who want to engage in that MEV marketplace or several of those would go and engage with those directly. So high level, you probably will at some point see MEV marketplaces on Hemi. It's probably not something that we ourselves would do, but it's something that any third party could spin up if they wanted to do it. Sequencers on the Hemi network would decide which MEV marketplaces they want to interact with or participate with. Depending on how the system's constructed, that may require the sequencer to post additional collateral, or if they pre-confirm a transaction and that's a thing supported by the MEV marketplace and then they don't include it, that collateral gets slashed or given to the harmed user or whatever. So depends on the mechanics of that MEV marketplace, but that will probably be something that's community driven. There will probably be multiple different versions of it eventually, and it would be at the sequencer level. And the way that incentives are distributed would be outside of the ecosystem, because there's really no way for the base protocol to capture MEV. The entire point of MEV is that there is value that can be extracted from choosing which transactions to include and not to include, and in which order. And there's no way that the protocol can enforce that. That is what you have sequencers for, and that's why they're called sequencers. They are sequencing the transactions, choosing which transactions get in and what order they put them in. So they are the point of control for that. And there's no way for the protocol to enforce rules that capture MEV by forcing a certain sequencer behavior and then forcing the sequencer to turn over like a portion of MEV that they collect, if that makes sense. So probably external MEV marketplaces, they can have their own incentive systems, and ultimately those incentive systems will go to the sequencer because they're the ones responsible for the decisions that allow them to extract MEV in the first place.
All right. Josh, do we have anything else on deck? Not that I've seen. Okay. Um, what? Oh, so hold on. Something's coming in chat. And about snapshot governance module. Is that the full question? Max, um, about snapshot in parentheses governance module. Is there anything you can share on that?
Still finalizing the details for governance mechanics, and it is going to evolve over time. So initially, we will be using something like Snapshot, whether that's Snapshot or one of their close competitors. And then eventually, we're going to migrate that to an on-chain governance voting system. Not that every vote would be done on-chain. There's ways you can do vote aggregation. But yeah, so initially, governance will be using something similar to Snapshot, and then it will migrate to a more direct on-chain enforced version of it. So, for example, voting to change the minimum fees charged by Bitcoin tunnel vaults, if that was something that was given to governance. With Snapshot, that would have to be something that's externally observed, but then put into action by a security council that respects the outcome of that vote through Snapshot. Whereas the on-chain version would let people directly vote in a way that is calculated deterministically, and then can actually perform that governance update of changing the fee vault structure or things of that nature. So initially, yes, something like Snapshot, and then longer term, moving over to an on-chain system with vote aggregation.
Awesome. And quick follow up to has there been any decision regarding utility for the NFT hatchling once it reaches mainnet?
Nothing at the moment. We're still playing around with some ideas. We do have some interesting thoughts. I won't share them because they're half baked, and it's also not quite my wheelhouse. But we have had some interesting ideas for something to do with all of the NFTs together in an interesting way. So hopefully we'll have more details on that relatively soon. But that is obviously a lower priority than a lot of the other work streams with mainnet incentive seasons closing, new tech we're deploying, getting ready for eventual TGE. So stay tuned. We do have some fun ideas, but it is a lower priority doing something around the NFTs versus everything else flying around right now. And I did see Madokin asked a question about some illustrations of the tech that Hemi enables. It's a good question. So the high level, there's a lot of interesting use cases, I'm sure, that we haven't thought of that people will go find and play around with. As far as things that we as a team think are interesting and want to see built and see value in, the first is non-custodial dexes, so being able to trade, EVM side, USDC, ETH, Hemi, whatever, for Bitcoin-based assets, whether that be Bitcoin itself or in the future, ordinals, BRC20s, runes, and be able to do that with native Bitcoin settlement. So never having to tunnel those assets over, but being able to engage in trade. And you buy Bitcoin with ETH, you receive that Bitcoin natively directly on the Bitcoin protocol with the right incentive structure to make sure that delivery actually occurs. So that's a really cool use case. Another one is non-custodial Bitcoin staking. So between some of the work that we're doing with HVM's variant of BitVM and HVM's just ability to view Bitcoin state, look at the UTXO table, there's some cool stuff you can do for building a Bitcoin staking system that doesn't have the same limitations as EOTS-based systems. So basically being able to get feature parity with something like an eigenlayer with native Bitcoin staking that's self-custodial. So that's another cool application. Bitcoin MEV marketplaces. So you could build basically a Bitcoin transaction accelerator where people can pay to get a Bitcoin transaction accelerated with USDC or ETH or some other Ethereum or Hemi-based asset. And basically Bitcoin miners would look at this Bitcoin MEV marketplace. They would see that somebody's attached an extra, $5 USDC bounty to this Bitcoin transaction. If they include that in their block, then they can collect that $5 bounty from the protocol. That lets you send Bitcoin transactions with low fees and then bump them separately in this MEV marketplace. And there's also some utility for that kind of a marketplace for building protocols that do require certain actions in Bitcoin to happen within a certain period of time. So for example, when you look at BitVM-based designs, there is a need for certain transactions to get included on Bitcoin within certain time intervals. And with a BitVM system, you have to, in the normal case, with like the canonical BitVM2 design, you have to bake those fees into the transaction structure, the pre-signed transaction graph of possibilities that you pre-sign at the time of constructing the BitVM vault, which leads to a lot of capital inefficiency because you basically have to assume the worst case for what Bitcoin fees may need to be paid for each of those transactions. Whereas with a on-chain MEV marketplace, if Bitcoin miners are engaging in it and actively using it, the protocol can actually allocate resources and pay for transaction acceleration independently of those pre-baked maximum Bitcoin fees that are set at the time of constructing those transaction graphs. So not just cool from an end user perspective, but also very beneficial for people building protocols that need to be able to pre-sign Bitcoin transactions and then, a year later be able to broadcast them and pay the appropriate amount of fees to actually get them included in Bitcoin. You can also do stuff with Bitcoin lending protocols. So being able to essentially put your native Bitcoin in a quasi self-custodial escrow system and then being able to borrow Ethereum assets against it, or do the reverse, post ETH and borrow native Bitcoin directly on the Bitcoin chain. So Bitcoin dexes, Bitcoin lending, Bitcoin MEV marketplace, native Bitcoin staking with full feature equivalence to eigenlayer. A lot of other cool things you can do with it, but I'd say those are probably the four main things that we're super excited about and I think have a lot of direct utility and make sense to end users for how to use them and engage with them.
All right. Well, I am not seeing. Oh, hold on. Any updates on an NFT marketplace and additional NFT marketplaces coming to Hemi network, and will stuff like the IBS ATAL be added?
Sorry, what's IBS?
I broke Sepolia,
Oh, okay, got it.
as opposed to the medical
Um,
definition, which
yeah.
we don't want to cover. So
Hopefully we don't have that. Marketplace for NFTs. I do know there's one in the pipeline. That's on the BD side, so I don't have any update on the exact details. But I know there is another one in the pipeline that's coming relatively soon, but I don't know the specifics on it. And that'd be for all NFTs, including the Brooksifolia, the any hatchlings, any of the NFTs that we've created as part of the project, and also any NFTs that anyone else creates. So it'll be another permissionless NFT protocol.
oh, that's killer. All right. Well, that actually brings us to the end of this session of Midweek with Max. So let me thank everyone for coming, and thanks for having us as always. And thank you to our mods and community helpers who are keeping things afloat and keeping myself and Joshua sane. It means a lot, and we thank you. I'm going to kick it over to Max for an outro, and then we can do a brief community update, and then we're going to get out of here.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming to another Midweek with Max. We will see you next week. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the near future, so stay tuned. Make sure you're following us on Twitter and Discord. Obviously, you guys are all here in Discord, but we will be posting stuff as it comes out on Discord as well as on Twitter. And so stay tuned for that. A lot of exciting things to come. And we are also going to schedule that engineering AMA. Still trying to figure out the timing, and there's some people's schedules are shifting around a lot this week, so we are trying to get that on the calendar. We will announce that as soon as we decide on a date there. And aside from that, huge thanks to all the mods who keep Rick and Josh from going insane, and we will see you next week.
All right. Yeah, so quick community updates. One, Joshua and I are meeting tomorrow to discuss um, the Hemithic role, and hopefully we can get a better timetable. Again, that's coming soon. We just don't have a timetable yet, but we're going to be discussing it tomorrow. In addition, Tier 1 for the Hemi Alliance will continue even when Tier 2 comes, and I believe we're targeting early next week for Tier 2 to begin. So you'll notice certain members advance to Tier 2. We'll announce like the criteria and everything else. We'll also announce hopefully some incentives that will accompany that, but it's going to be open still, so it's not like, if you see some people like reach Tier 2 and you haven't yet, it doesn't mean you're not gonna. It just means we have to do it in like some batches and whatnot. But Tier 1 is gonna remain open. That's it's really all I got for today. If anyone wants to sing, I got time for like one person. If anyone wants the rap god roll, otherwise we can do an extended one for next week. All right, come on up, Hermes. All yours, bud.
Hey, hey.
Everyone, this is Hermes from Hype Partners, who is kind of spearheading our ambassador program slash Hemi Alliance. Actually, if there's anything you want to add for the Alliance before you bust into Sog, please feel free. I'm just going to mute, and
Uh,
stage is yours, brother.
nice. Guys, it's all about consistency. So, like, keep creating your tweets, okay? We are watching, we are selecting the coolest guys. Don't feel like dismissed if you are not picked in the first batch, but because we will keep watching, okay? Consistency. Keep creating about Hemi, and eventually you will be recognized. So it's my time to sing, right?
Oh
Sheets
yeah.
of empty canvas, so the sheet of clay. Without me Oh, as her body was it. All five horizons revolve around her soul as the earth to the sun. The air I tasted and breathed have taken her. Ooh, when all I thought of was everything. Ooh, I know she gave me all that she was, and I might be the hands shaped beneath the clouds of what was everything. All the pictures have all been washed in black. That would everything. I'll take a walk outside. I'm surrounded by so it's a place and feel the laughter. Oh, why do I say, ooh, and twisted thoughts that spin round my head? I'm spinning, oh, I'm spinning. How quickly can the sun drop away? And I might be the hand, red or broken glass of what was everything. All the pictures have all been washed in black. That would everything. All the love gone bad, turn my world to black. That would all I be, all that I am, all that I be. Yeah. I know someday you'll have a beautiful life. I know you'll be a star in somebody else's sky. But why, why can it be? What can it be? Chururu, 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 chururu. Thank you. It was it. I hope it was enough to get the Hap God role.
That was amazing, and you have the role, sir. And you're the first person who's ever brought an instrument.
So this is a bonus, guys. Next time you all need to bring an instrument.
That's true. From now on, bring instruments.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
It could be, if you believe in yourself enough. I think that's how that works. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Please expect a lot of cool stuff in the next 2 weeks, and also more info about Hemi Alliance Tier 2, the continuation of Tier 1, the litany of cool updates that Max spoke of, and we will see you guys in Discord and on our socials. And again, I do want to reiterate that, let me get this date correct, if anyone is in New York for permissionless, it's going to be June 24th. Jeff Garzik will be speaking at 2:30 p.m. for the event Where to Build on Bitcoin. So if you're in the area, you don't want to miss that. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.